The peace I was looking for wasn't an absence of sound, but an absence of conflict. For 30 years, my life had been a zero-sum game. As a forensic accountant, my job was to sift through the digital entrails of failing corporations, to find the rot, the fraud, the hidden ledgers where powerful men concealed their crimes. I was a professional wrecking ball. Every victory for the truth was a catastrophic defeat for someone else, leaving a trail of shattered careers, ruined families, and enemies who knew how to hold a grudge. The stress had finally taken its toll, manifesting as a tremor in my hands and a constant, grinding tension behind my eyes. So, I walked away. My inheritance was my sanctuary, a small, 50-acre ranch nestled in a gentle valley, bordered on one side by a vast national forest, and on the other by the crystal-clear waters of Miller's Lake. The ranch, and the lake named for my great-grandfather, who first settled it, was a pocket of rustic authenticity that had somehow survived the relentless march of upscale development. It was a place where the only balance sheet that mattered was the one between sunlight and shadow. The only bottom line, the number of fish in the cooler. My sole companion in this new venture was Bailey, a scruffy terrier mix I'd adopted from a local shelter. He was a creature of simple, honest desires, a warm spot on the rug, a well-thrown stick, and an unwavering belief that I was the greatest man in the world. We were both refugees, seeking asylum in the quiet country. The first hint that my asylum was about to be invaded arrived on a pristine, custom-built golf cart, painted a ghastly shade of champagne gold. It rolled to a stop at the edge of my property, where my simple wire fence met the obsessively manicured, emerald-green turf of the Golden Meadow Estates, a new, multi-million-dollar subdivision that loomed on the hills above my valley. A woman emerged, dressed in a crisp, white tennis skirt and a polo shirt bearing the community's prancing horse logo. Her face was a testament to expensive dermatology, pulled tight and immobile. She held a clipboard like a weapon. "Hello there," she called, her voice a jarringly bright, commanding chirp. "You must be the new owner." I was in the middle of sanding a piece of reclaimed barnwood for a bookshelf I was building, the scent of sawdust and fresh air a comforting perfume. I put down the sander and walked over, Bailey trotting at my heels. "I'm David Chen," I said, offering a polite nod. "The ranch has been in my family for generations." "How quaint," she said, the words dripping with condescension. "I am Margaret Thompson, president of the Golden Meadow Homeowners Association." She didn't offer her hand, her eyes instead performing a critical scan of my property. Her lips pursed in a thin line of profound disapproval. Her gaze settled on the small, weathered boathouse at the edge of my lake. "I'm here on a matter of community aesthetics," she announced, tapping her clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. "Your boathouse. It's in a state of quite shocking disrepair. The peeling paint, and is that rust on the roof? It's a significant visual blight that negatively impacts the natural scenic vistas promised to our residents." I looked at the boathouse. It was old, built by my grandfather. The paint was peeling, and the tin roof did indeed have a patina of rust. To me, it was character. To her, it was a flaw in her perfect, curated world. "Mrs. Thompson," I said, my voice even, "I appreciate your concern for the view, but this is a private ranch. It's not part of your HOA." A humorless smile touched her lips. "A common misconception. While your parcel is not technically under our covenants, your proximity makes your property's appearance a matter of legitimate HOA concern. Your visual signature falls within our sphere of influence. We have a responsibility to our members to protect their investment. and that means ensuring a consistent and upscale aesthetic throughout the entire valley. It was the most beautifully absurd piece of corporate doublespeak I had ever heard, and I had audited Enron. She was inventing a legal concept, visual signature, to extend her petty dictatorship beyond her borders. "I'm afraid I don't subscribe to your sphere of influence theory," I said, my patience beginning to fray. Her smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold authority. "You will receive a notice in the mail detailing the required remediation. You will have 30 days to submit a plan for repainting the structure in an approved earth tone color and replacing the roof with non-reflective shingles. If you fail to comply, we will begin levying fines for non-compliance with community standards." "You can't find me," I stated, the absurdity of the situation making me feel like I was in a dream. "Oh, Mr. Chen," she said, her voice a low, threatening purr. "You have no idea what I can do. You are a loose liability in a portfolio of high-value assets, and I always neutralize my liabilities." She turned, climbed back into her golden chariot, and sped away. I stood there, the scent of sawdust replaced by the faint, cloying smell of her expensive perfume on the breeze. Bailey whined and nudged my hand, sensing the sudden tension. I had left a world of predatory sharks in suits, only to find one in a tennis skirt, right on my doorstep. She had just declared my peaceful existence a liability. In my old world, that was a declaration of war. I had hoped I was done with war, but it seemed the war had other plans. My initial response to Margaret Thompson's absurd ultimatum was dictated by the man I was trying to become, not the man I had been. The old David Chen, the forensic accountant who saw every conflict as a balance sheet to be weaponized, would have immediately launched a counteroffensive. He would have dug into the Golden Meadow HOA's financials, subpoenaed their records, and found the inevitable fiscal weaknesses to exploit. He would have turned her world upside down before she'd even had her morning latte. But I was retired. I was here to sand wood and fish. I was here to heal. So, I took a deep breath and chose the path of de-escalation. I would not engage her on her ludicrous terms. I would build a simple, clear, legal wall, and hope she had the sense to stop walking into it. The official notice of non-compliance arrived a week later. It was a masterpiece of the genre, printed on thick, cream-colored paper and filled with hollow, threatening phrases like, "in accordance with the bylaws," and "failure to remediate will result in punitive action." It formally demanded I repaint my boathouse-approved colors, taupe tranquility, or greige serenity, and replace the roof. A schedule of fines was attached, starting at $100 per day. I placed the letter in a new file folder, which I labeled Golden Meadow, and called my lawyer, Julia. She had been the lead counsel for my firm for 15 years, a woman with a mind like a steel trap and a demeanor to match. "Let me guess," she said, her voice dry after I explained the situation. "She has a perfectly coiffed helmet of blonde hair and speaks of the community's aesthetic as if it's a matter of national security." "You've met her type," I said. "I've dismantled them in court. David, they're bullies who fold like cheap suits the moment you push back with actual legal authority. What's the play?" "The play is one and done," I said. "Draft a single, polite, but legally unambiguous letter. Cite my deed, the county plat map, and the relevant state property laws. Make it clear that this is private property. Her HOA has zero jurisdiction, and any further attempts to fine or harass me will be met with a lawsuit for which she and the HOA board will be held personally liable. We send it certified mail, and that's it. We don't respond to anything else. Got it, she said. A clear statement of legal fact, establishing a baseline for future claims. Smart. While I'm at it, do you want me to pull the HOA's public financial disclosures? It might be useful to know what kind of war chest she's working with. A flicker of the old me sparked to life. Yes, I said, the word coming out before I could stop it. Pull everything. Charter documents, quarterly statements, meeting minutes, everything. It was just for defensive purposes. I told myself. Just due diligence. The letter Julia drafted was a thing of beauty. It was the legal equivalent of a perfectly executed headshot. We sent it, and for a few weeks, there was silence. I allowed myself a glimmer of hope. Perhaps the wall had held. Perhaps reason had prevailed. I was wrong. A month later, another envelope arrived. It wasn't a notice. It was an invoice. It was for $3,000 in unpaid fines for the boathouse violation. It was accompanied by a new notice. This one was for my canoe. It was a classic red cedar strip canoe I had restored myself. According to Margaret, its color was a garish and disruptive presence on the otherwise tranquil and natural palette of the lake. The fine for the canoe was $50 per day. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it was breathtaking. She had received a letter from a lawyer telling her she had no authority, and she had responded by simply ignoring it, by continuing to act as if her power was absolute. She was not just a bully, she was delusional. With each new invoice for the overgrown state of the native wildflowers near our property line, for the unapproved wood smoke from my cabin's chimney, I felt the peaceful, retired man. I was trying to be shrink, and the cold, calculating accountant grow. I didn't get angry. I got methodical. I added every piece of paper to the file. I started a spreadsheet, logging the dates, the alleged violations, the illegal fines. I was no longer just a homeowner trying to be left alone. I was building a case. I was documenting a pattern of systematic, illegal harassment. The old David Chen was re-emerging, not with a bang, but with the quiet, meticulous clicks of a keyboard, creating a ledger that would, eventually, bring Margaret Thompson's entire fraudulent enterprise crashing down. When her campaign of paper terrorism failed to produce my surrender, Margaret escalated to a new front minor: deniable acts of property damage. It was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to create a sense of unease and vulnerability, to make me feel unsafe in my own sanctuary. The first attack was on my lake. I went down to the dock one morning with my coffee and saw it immediately. A sickly, green-brown scum was spreading in a 50-foot radius around my boathouse. It was an algae bloom, aggressive and unnatural. The rest of the lake was crystal clear. I knelt on the dock and looked closer. I could see small, white granules mixed in with the muck on the lake bed. Fertilizer. Someone had dumped a large bag of high-nitrogen lawn fertilizer into the water right in front of my property. It was an act of ecological vandalism, calculated to ruin my little piece of the lake and, no doubt, to provide a basis for more environmental complaints from her. The old David would have seen this as an attack on an asset, a quantifiable depreciation. The new David felt a deeper, more personal pain. This lake was a living thing to me, a place of profound beauty and peace. Poisoning it felt like a sacrilege. My response, however, was pure old David. I didn't get mad. I got evidence. I took out my boat and collected multiple water samples, carefully labeling each vial with the date, time, and exact location. I photographed the bloom from every angle. I even scooped up a sample of the sediment containing the fertilizer granules. I sent one set of samples to a state university lab for analysis and another to a private environmental forensics firm I had used in the past to bust corporations for illegal dumping. Then, I spent the next 3 days with a skimmer and a pump, painstakingly cleaning up the mess myself. I didn't report it to her or the authorities. I documented it, filed the lab reports when they came back confirming the presence of commercial-grade fertilizer, and added the receipts for the lab work and my own cleanup equipment to a new section in my file labeled Damages. A week later, they came for my signs. I had several small, professionally made signs along my property line that read, "Private property, no trespassing." I came out one morning to find them all gone. Not just taken down, but vanished. It was another petty act, designed to blur the lines of my property, to invite her residents to wander onto my land. This time, my response was more robust. I didn't just replace the signs. I installed a security system, but given my background, it wasn't a simple off-the-shelf kit. I consulted with a corporate security firm I trusted and installed a network of discrete, high-definition cameras. They were weatherproof, had night vision, and were positioned not just to watch my cabin, but to create a complete, overlapping field of view of my entire property line, my dock, and the lakefront. The system recorded 24/7 to a secure server in my basement. I was thinking in terms of risk mitigation and evidentiary integrity. I was establishing a clear, unambiguous record of my domain. In a very real sense. I was preparing for discovery, for the eventual court case I now knew was inevitable. The cameras paid off almost immediately. One night, around midnight, the motion detection alert pinged my phone. I pulled up the live feed. Two figures, teenagers by the look of them, were creeping along my shoreline. One of them I recognized as Margaret Thompson's son, Chad, a swaggering, entitled kid I'd seen on a jet ski. They were spray painting graffiti on the rocks at the edge of my lawn. The words were childish, "Get out." HOA owns this, but the act was criminal. The 4K camera captured their faces perfectly in the infrared light. I watched them for a moment, a cold fury rising. Then, instead of calling the sheriff, I did something different. I turned on the external speaker I had connected to the camera system. "Chad," I said, my voice booming out of a small, hidden speaker in a nearby pine tree. "The camera resolution is excellent. I'd suggest you and your friend head home before the sheriff's deputies get here to take your mugshots. I'm sure your mother would be very disappointed in your poor operational security." They froze, their faces a comical mask of terror. They dropped the spray cans and scrambled away into the darkness. I saved the high-definition video file. It was another perfect, irrefutable piece of evidence. It was also a message to Margaret. I was no longer a passive target. I was watching, and I was building a case. Having failed to intimidate me or breach my physical defenses, Margaret shifted her campaign to slander, aiming to turn me into a villain in the eyes of the entire community. It was a classic corporate smear campaign, full of innuendo and outright lies, designed to isolate me and justify her escalating aggression. The battlefield was the Golden Meadow Estates online forum, a place I accessed through a shell account Julia had set up for me. Reading the forum was like wading through a toxic swamp. Margaret, writing as the board president, orchestrated the narrative with practiced skill. She started by painting me as a hostile and mentally unstable recluse. "Dear residents," one post began, "please exercise caution near the northern property line. We have had several reports of the individual residing there exhibiting confrontational and erratic behavior. He seems to be under the delusion that the lake is his private property. For your safety, please avoid any interaction and report any disturbances to the board." The comment section was a chorus of her sycophants. So scary I take my morning walk on that trail. Thank you for looking out for us, Margaret. It was a perfectly executed piece of propaganda, turning my legitimate defense of my property into an act of aggression. Next, she began to build on the lie she had started with the DEQ, portraying me as an environmental terrorist. Urgent Lake Health Update. Our contracted lake management company has detected elevated levels of phosphates and nitrates in the North Cove. These pollutants are consistent with improper waste disposal and chemical runoff. This is a serious threat to our lake's ecosystem and, frankly, to our children's health. The board is taking this very seriously and exploring all legal options to protect our shared natural resources from such negligence. This post enraged me more than any other. She was using the algae bloom she had created as evidence against me. It was a level of cynical manipulation that even I, a veteran of the most cutthroat business world, found shocking. I saved the screenshots, cross-referencing them with the lab reports that proved the fertilizer had been dumped. Her own words were now evidence against her in a potential civil suit for damages. One evening, my cameras caught a glimpse into the heart of her pathology. She and her husband, Robert, were having drinks on their sprawling deck, which overlooked my property. My long-range camera, equipped with a sensitive microphone, picked up their conversation. "I just don't understand why you're so obsessed with this man, Margaret," Robert said, his voice weary. "He's just some old guy in a cabin. Let it go." "You don't understand," she snapped, her voice tight with a familiar, brittle anger I'd heard in deposed CEOs. "He represents everything I fought against for 30 years. Mediocrity, disrespect for the system. I built a billion-dollar division from nothing. Robert, I demanded excellence. We had standards, and what did I get for it? Pushed out by a board of spineless yes-men who couldn't handle a strong leader." She gestured wildly out at the lake, at my small, rustic cabin. This is the same thing. It's a flaw in the system, an imperfection. It cannot be allowed to stand. This community will be perfect. It will be a testament to my vision. It was all there. Her obsession with Golden Meadow was a desperate attempt to recreate the corporate empire she had lost. The HOA was her new company, the residents her employees, and I was the rogue element, the failed acquisition, the one part of the market she couldn't control. Her fight with me wasn't about a boathouse or a canoe. It was about her own shattered ego. Understanding her pathology gave me a new level of clarity. To defeat her, I didn't need to fight her on her terms. I needed to do what I did best, conduct a full forensic audit of her entire operation and, when the time was right, execute a hostile takeover. I made a call to Julia. "Julia," I said, "I need you to use your contacts. I want to see the detailed transaction records for the Golden Meadow HOA for the past 2 years. I'm looking at their quarterly statements, and the line item for community enrichment projects is a slush fund. I want to know exactly where that money is going." "You think she's embezzling?" Julia asked. "People like her always do," I replied. "They begin to believe that the company's assets are their own personal piggy bank. I want to see every receipt, every invoice, every check. It's time to follow the money." The weaponization of authorities was Margaret's most predictable and, ultimately, most self-destructive move. Convinced of her own righteousness and frustrated by my refusal to be intimidated, she sought to use the legitimate power of the state as her personal enforcement arm. Each time she did it, she unwittingly handed me another perfect, legally documented piece of evidence for my case. The first call, after the DEQ fiasco, was to the county planning and zoning office. I was in my workshop, restoring an old wooden chair, when a county inspector's truck rumbled down my driveway. He was a portly, cheerful man named George, and he was holding a complaint form. "Mr. Chen," he said, scratching his head, "I've got a complaint here about an unpermitted structure being built on your property. Says you're adding a second story to your boathouse." I looked at him, then at my single-story, 90-year-old boathouse, which was clearly not under construction. "George," I said, "does it look like I'm building anything?" He chuckled. "Not unless you're the world's quietest carpenter. Look, I gotta be here. The complaint was filed officially. Mind if I take a look?" "Be my guest," I said. He walked around the boathouse, took a few photos for his file, and shook my head. "This is a waste of taxpayer money," he muttered. "This is the third bogus complaint I've had from that Golden Meadow place this month. The president over there seems to think we're her personal contractors." He handed me his card. "If you need a witness for a harassment case, you call me." I thanked him, took the card, and wrote a detailed account of the visit, which I added to the file. Another official, unfounded report. The pattern was becoming undeniable. A few weeks later, she tried the health department. The complaint was that my septic system was failing and leaking into the lake. This was a more serious accusation, and the inspector who arrived was not as cheerful as George. He was all business. "I need to see the schematics for your septic system, sir," he said, "and your last 2 years of maintenance and pump-out records." "Of course," I said. When I'd first moved in, I'd had the entire old system replaced with a brand-new, state-of-the-art septic field, precisely because I was so protective of the lake. I led him to my office and produced a thick binder containing the architectural plans, the installation permits, the percolation test results, and the quarterly maintenance records from the company I had on retainer. He spent 30 minutes reviewing the documents, his expression slowly shifting from suspicion to grudging admiration. "Mr. Chen," he said finally, closing the binder, "this is the most well-documented and well-maintained private septic system in my entire district. This complaint is, for lack of a better word, insane." He, too, left me his card and promised to note the malicious nature of the complaint in his official report. It was after this incident that I knew I had enough. I had a clear, documented pattern of her using public resources to harass me. I called Julia. "Julia," I said, "I'm looking at the HOA's transaction records you pulled. The Community Enrichment Fund. Can you see the charge from 2 weeks ago for $2,500 to Lakeside Party Planners?" "I see it," she said, "and another one for $3,000 to Prestige Event Rentals." "And did you see the invitation that went out on the community forum this morning?" I asked. There was a pause as she presumably pulled it up. "Oh, she said. "Chad Thompson's 21st birthday bash. An exclusive celebration on the shores of Chad's Cove." "Where the hell is Chad's Cove?" "It's what they've apparently decided to rename my private property," I said, my voice cold as ice. "She's using HOA funds to throw a massive birthday party for her son, and she's planning to host it on my land, without my permission. She's just gifted my lake to her son." "David," Julia said, her voice sharp, "that's not just harassment. That's criminal misappropriation of funds, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit trespassing. This is it. This is the overt, undeniable act we've been waiting for." "I know," I said, "and I have a plan." But I need you to do something for me first. I need you to call the DA's office. Tell them we have an open and shut case against an HOA president for a pattern of harassment and misuse of public services, culminating in embezzlement. But tell them we don't want to act yet. We want to let the final crime play out. We want to catch her in the act. You want to set a trap, she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. I want to execute a hostile takeover, I corrected her. And the party is her poison pill. It's the move that makes her vulnerable. We've done our due diligence. We've assessed the target's weaknesses. It's time to make our move. The final threat was not a quiet escalation. It was a public declaration of war, an act of such staggering entitlement that it would serve as the centerpiece of her downfall. It began with a large, professionally printed sign, erected overnight at the trailhead where the Golden Meadow walking path met my property line. It was made of dark, carved wood and mounted on 2 stone pillars. In gaudy, gold leaf lettering, it read, Chad's Cove, a community asset of Golden Meadow Estates. Gifted on the occasion of Chad Thompson's 21st birthday. I stared at the sign, a cold, calm fury settling over me. She hadn't just trespassed. She hadn't just slandered me. She had, with the full, arrogant backing of her sham authority, attempted to formally seize my land, rename it after her delinquent son, and declare it a public park. She was attempting to erase my ownership, my family's history, through sheer force of will. The flyers for the party were all over the community forum. It was to be a massive affair, a live band, a catered barbecue, and the main event, the christening of Chad's new jet ski. The entire community was invited to celebrate Chad's special day at their new community cove. There were even photos of the brand new jet ski, a hideously loud and powerful machine, which I knew from the HOA's financial records had been purchased with community enrichment funds. She was not just embezzling from her residents, she was flaunting it. This was the final, fatal mistake I had been waiting for. This was not a deniable act of vandalism or a baseless complaint. This was a premeditated, large-scale, and very public criminal act. It was conspiracy to commit trespassing, misappropriation of funds, and a host of other civil and criminal violations. My phone rang. It was Julia. David, she said, her voice all business. I've spoken with the assistant district attorney. He's reviewed the file you've compiled. He called it a prosecutor's dream. He's ready to move, but he agrees with our strategy. He wants to catch her, her son, and any other conspirators red-handed. He's prepared to have deputies on standby. What's the plan? This was the moment the old David, the strategist, took full control. The last vestiges of the peaceful, retiring man were set aside. This was no longer about de-escalation. It was about a clean, decisive, and permanent resolution. Here's the plan, I said, pacing my workshop as I spoke. The party is Saturday at noon. I am not going to interfere. I want them to fully commit. I want the band set up. I want the caterers serving food. I want Chad on that jet ski, illegally operating it on my private lake. I want dozens of residents trespassing on my property. You want to maximize the witness pool and the number of co-conspirators. Julia finished for me. Bold. When the party is in full swing, I continued, I will walk down to my dock. I will have a copy of my deed and a formal no trespass order. I will inform them that they are on private property and ask them to leave. Margaret will, inevitably, refuse and likely become confrontational. She will almost certainly call the police herself to claim I am the one harassing her. This is critical. We want her to be the one to involve law enforcement. So the deputies arrive in response to her call, not yours, Julia mused. It removes any suggestion that you orchestrated their presence. Very clean. Exactly. When the deputies arrive, I will present my documentation. I want you there, Julia, with a full copy of our legal file, including the evidence of her financial crimes. While the deputies are dealing with the trespassing issue, you will present the evidence of embezzlement to the senior officer on the scene. The DA will have already briefed them on the case. They will have everything they need to make an immediate arrest for multiple felonies. Right there, in the middle of her son's party, in front of the entire community, she defrauded. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. David, Julia finally said, her voice filled with a professional respect I hadn't heard from her in years. That is the most elegant and brutal hostile takeover plan I have ever heard. It's a work of art. She called me a liability, I said, looking out the window at the absurd sign bearing her son's name. I'm just doing what I've always done, neutralizing it. The day of Chad's birthday party arrived with a perfect, cloudless sky. The kind of beautiful summer day that made my valley feel like a paradise. It was a paradise under siege. By noon, the sound of a terrible rock band echoed across the lake, a thumping, distorted bass line that sent the birds scattering from the trees. My cameras showed a large crowd gathering on my shoreline, spreading out blankets and setting up coolers. A massive banner that read, "Happy 21st Chad," was strung between two of my oldest pine trees. At the center of it all was Margaret Thompson, holding court like a queen, accepting praise from her residents for her generosity. And then came the jet ski. It roared to life with a sound like 1,000 angry hornets. And Chad, her arrogant son, began carving up the calm surface of my lake, sending huge wakes crashing against my dock and eroding the shoreline. He was whooping and hollering, a can of beer in one hand, a picture of pure, unadulterated entitlement. This was the scene I had been waiting for. The crime, in all its gaudy glory, was in progress. I changed out of my work clothes and put on a simple, clean button-down shirt and slacks. I took the laminated copy of my property deed, the no trespass order Julia had drafted, and my phone. Then, I took a deep, steadying breath. It was time. I walked out of my cabin and down the gentle slope to the lake. As I approached, a few people noticed me, their laughter dying in their throats. A wave of silence spread through the crowd as I walked onto my own dock. The band faltered, then stopped playing altogether. All eyes were on me. Margaret, seeing me, detached herself from a group of her cronies and strode toward the dock, her face a mask of furious indignation. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped. "You are not welcome here. This is a private party." "This is private property," I said calmly, my voice carrying easily in the sudden silence. "It is my private property. This party is an illegal gathering. I am asking you, and all of your guests, to please leave immediately." A wave of derisive laughter went through the crowd. Margaret's son, Chad, brought the jet ski roaring up to the dock, sending a spray of water over my shoes. "Get lost, old man," he yelled. "This is my cove now." Margaret crossed her arms, a smug, triumphant smirk on her face. "You heard him. You're trespassing, Mr. Chen. I think it's time we called the sheriff and had you removed." She pulled out her phone and theatrically dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a man who is trespassing and harassing my son and our guests at a private community event at Chad's Cove," she said, her voice filled with feigned panic. "He's very aggressive. We're afraid of what he might do." Please send deputies immediately. It was perfect. She had sprung the trap on herself. We waited. The crowd watched me, some with scorn, some with a dawning uncertainty. Margaret stood there, radiant in her perceived victory. 20 minutes later, 2 sheriff's department vehicles pulled down my driveway. 2 deputies I recognized from Margaret's previous bogus calls got out, their expressions weary. "What seems to be the problem here?" the senior deputy asked, his eyes scanning the bizarre scene. "Officer, thank God you're here," Margaret exclaimed, rushing forward. "This man has crashed our private party and is threatening us. We want him removed." The deputy turned to me. "Sir?" I held out the laminated deed. "This is my property. Deputy. The lake. The dock. The land they are all standing on. Here is my deed, filed with the county. These people are the ones who are trespassing." The deputy took the deed and examined it. He knew it was legitimate. He looked at Margaret, his patience clearly gone. "Ma'am, the deed seems to be in order. This is Mr. Chen's property. You and your guests are the ones who need to leave." "This is ridiculous," Margaret shrieked. "This is a community asset. The HOA will sue him into oblivion." This was my cue. "That might be difficult, Margaret," I said, my voice cutting through her tirade. I nodded to Julia, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the woods. She walked forward, her briefcase in hand. "You see," I continued, "to fund your legal battles, or any of your projects for that matter, the HOA needs money. And as of this morning, your operating accounts have been frozen." A wave of confusion passed over Margaret's face. "What are you talking about? That's impossible." "Is it?" I asked. I gestured to Julia, who opened her briefcase. "The Golden Meadow Estates HOA has been found to be in gross violation of its loan covenants, specifically through the repeated and flagrant misappropriation of community funds for personal use like, for example," I gestured to the jet ski, "a $20,000 birthday present for your son." "That's a lie," she sputtered, her face turning a blotchy red. "Is it?" I repeated, my voice cold as steel. "The loan on this development's common areas, the loan you thought was held by First National Bank, was sold as a distressed asset 6 months ago. It was purchased by a private asset management firm." I let the silence hang for a moment, enjoying the dawning, uncomprehending horror in her eyes. "That firm," I said, delivering the final, devastating blow, "is called Chen Financial Holdings. I am Chen Financial Holdings. For the past 6 months, Margaret, you've been paying your mortgage to me. And this morning, when you used my money to fund a party on my land, you gave me cause to call the loan. The HOA is insolvent. All of its assets, your clubhouse, your tennis courts, your precious landscaped entrance are now under my control, pending foreclosure." The silence that followed was profound. The crowd stared, mouths agape. Margaret looked as if she had been turned to stone. In that moment, Julia handed a thick file to the senior deputy. "And officer," I said, my voice ringing with finality, "that file contains irrefutable proof of embezzlement and multiple felonies. I believe the district attorney is expecting your call." The resolution was a quiet, systematic dismantling of Margaret Thompson's entire world. The deputies, armed with the file Julia provided and pre-briefed by the DA, arrested her on the spot. Her initial charge was for filing a false police report. But that was just the beginning. The sight of their imperious leader being read her rights and placed in the back of a patrol car sent a shockwave through the partygoers. who dispersed in a stunned, silent exodus. Chad's birthday party was over. The legal fallout was catastrophic for Margaret. The forensic audit of the HOA's books, which I initiated as the primary creditor, revealed years of embezzlement and financial mismanagement. She had been using the community's funds as her personal slush fund for everything from lavish parties to designer clothes. Faced with a mountain of evidence and testimony from a now furious community of residents she had defrauded, she pleaded guilty to felony embezzlement. She was sentenced to 2 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution. Her social standing, the currency she valued above all else, was reduced to zero. She became a local pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. As the new owner of the debt and the de facto controller of the community's common property, I had a choice. I could have foreclosed, sold off the assets, and walked away with a handsome profit. The old David Chen would have done just that. But my goal was not profit. It was peace. I called a community meeting a real one this time. I explained the situation and offered them a path forward. I worked with them to establish a new, financially responsible HOA board. I restructured their debt into a manageable, long-term loan with fair interest rates, in exchange for their commitment to fiscal responsibility and a permanent, legally binding respect for my property's sovereignty. I forgave a significant portion of the principal. The community of Golden Meadow began to heal. Freed from Margaret's tyrannical and expensive rule, it became a genuinely pleasant place. The focus shifted from punitive aesthetic rules to actual community building. My relationship with my neighbors transformed from hostile to harmonious. I was no longer the strange recluse on the lake. I was the man who had liberated them. My life returned to the quiet rhythm I had craved. My boathouse remained, its peeling paint a badge of honor. My red canoe sat peacefully by the water's edge. The silence in my valley was broken only by the sound of the wind, the call of the birds, and Bailey's gentle, snoring sighs. One evening, sitting on my dock, I watched the sun set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The tremor in my hands was gone. I had been dragged back into the world of conflict. I had tried to escape, but I had fought the war on my own terms, using the skills of my past not for destruction, but to build a lasting, unassailable peace. I had balanced the books, one last time.